I want to pick up a little bit on what I talked about last week as we began a new idea of talking about life groups and kind of going through that. And we talked about how Jesus had different size groups that he talked with. He preached to the large crowds. He taught with his disciples. But then there was this inner three, Peter, James, and John, that really got to know him on a more personal level. And I talked about why that was important and how we were launching with this new concept of small groups, calling them life groups. And we just wanted to encourage people to do life together. And we laid those out in different categories of a men's group, a women's group. We have a co-ed group, men and women's group together, and then sub-30 group. And within there, then there was three different ways they would be broken down. They would either be social fellowship type groups, Bible study, discipleship type groups, or outreach and service type groups. They would only run for so many months. They're going to run 3 months on, and then they would take a month off, and that allows the people who are hosting a break and all those kinds of things. All this month, we're looking if you're interested in leading a group. Sign up in the Connection Point. Not about joining them yet. We're going to launch that in September once we know all the groups that we have and leaders. But if you're interested in leading a group, and they would start in October, run October, November. So sign up back there, and maybe there's something you like to do. I don't know. You like to crochet little booties or something like that for babies or something like that. Sign up back there. Or you like to play dominoes or whatever it is that you like to do, that you just like to gather other people together, do that. Or you're looking for someone to disciple and go through a discipleship with, or you want to lead a Bible study of some kind, sign up back there. So I want to kind of pick up on that a little bit about why it's important then to be involved in a small group and a life group setting. And what I want to do is look at the picture of the inner three that Jesus had, Peter, James, and John. And what was it in their lives, or what character traits or something that they bring to the relationship of Christ that you and I can learn today that gives us some reasons of why we need to have a smaller setting, dare say, a life group setting as we just go through this journey called life. Can we do that this morning? Just got 3 points, huh? I'd say I'd be short, but I ran like 15 minutes long in the first service, so I won't make any more promises that I might not be able to keep. Let's read through the text here, Matthew chapter 16 and verse 21 and following. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord," he said, "this shall never happen to you." And Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men." When we hear this section, we usually think of Peter in a negative term, like, oh my goodness, he's rebuking the Lord and that sort of thing in bed. But I want you to look at this from a different perspective and see that there is something positive to say about Peter, and that is this. You can write this down in your bulletin here. You need friends who are willing to be honest with you when they think you're wrong. Now, Peter may have said something to the Lord, and on this side of the cross, we know that that was a wrong statement. But I can tell you that I would bet with the other guys who were listening, who overheard, and he takes him to the side, overheard, probably didn't think Peter was as far-fetched as what we think it today. They probably thought, it's a good thing Peter went over there to say something to him, because why in the world would the Messiah come into the world and then the Messiah go down to Jerusalem and be killed and all that we have given up to follow after him? This doesn't make any sense. But Jesus was walking the walk that the Father had laid out for him. He was to be the supreme sacrifice for sin. But Peter is unable to understand that. He thinks that Jesus is making a mistake. And even though we know that Peter's understanding was wrong, his actions demonstrate that he did have love for Christ, that he was willing to raise his voice and to question Jesus' actions. He doesn't talk behind Jesus' back. He doesn't go to the other disciples and say, hey, I got to tell you, he made some statements out there, but I don't know why we're following him. We ought to go back to our fishing nets because, man, this train's going down. This is like AIG. We're all going to lose here. We better get out now. He doesn't do any of that stuff. He takes Jesus aside, and it's a bold and gutsy move. Ultimately, it's wrong spiritually because the things of God are in the mind of Christ, and Peter doesn't know that, but he has the courage to say something to him. Matthew 18, verse 15 and following says this, that if your brother sins against you, go and show him his fault just between the two of you. If he listens to you, you have won your brother over. But if you will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If you refuse to listen to them, tell it to the church. If you refuse to listen even to the church, treat him as you would a pagan or tax collector. Jesus had laid out a plan of how to deal with someone when they're erring, and Peter follows right along with that. He thinks that Jesus is in the wrong, and he takes him to the side. He goes one-on-one, and he talks to him. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that Jesus sinned here, but Peter thought that he was misguided, and at least he spoke up. You need to have people in your life who know you well enough, who you've given them the ability and the right to speak into your life, that they can call you out when they see your life being derailed. When they see that you're going places that you shouldn't be going, you're hanging out with people you shouldn't be hanging out with, you're doing things you shouldn't be doing, whatever it is, talking how you shouldn't be talking, doesn't matter, but someone's speaking into your life to say, hey, what's going on? I noticed that something is amiss. You're not coming to church anymore. You're not involved in study groups anymore. You're not even joyous anymore. So what's going on? I see something happening. We need someone like that who can speak into our lives when our lives begin to spin out of control. Because sometimes we are so entangled in sin that we don't even see the top getting ready to fall off the table. Proverbs 27 verse 6 says, wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. Someone else, an enemy who doesn't care about you, oh, everything looks fine, oh, that looks great, and they just stay out of it. But the wounds of a friend, they might hurt when someone says, hey, I noticed your life is out of control, or you've been missing, or you know better than that, you weren't raised that way, or whatever. That might be painful, but you can trust those wounds. Though they are painful, the hope is that they will be positive. Though they hurt, the hope is that they will be helpful. We need friends who are close enough to speak honestly in our lives. Galatians 6:1 says, brothers, if someone is caught in a sin, you who are spiritual should restore him gently, but watch yourself, or you may also be tempted. Paul says, look, it is our duty and our obligation as believers that if we see something going on, that we speak out about it. But we do so in a kind and gentle way, restoring them back to God. But just to let it go is not the right thing to do. In our own community, some of you may know this, I don't know, but there was a young man who took his life. Some of our own students know this young man here. I don't know much about his life. I pray for the family. It's a terrible tragedy to go through. But I would dare say there were some people around who probably could see some things going on in his life, see that maybe he was a little removed or down, depressed or something. And I just wonder, did he have a friend who was honest enough to speak into his life? Now, would that have changed the tragedy? I don't know. But I know that for some it might. And it could possibly have been for him as well. You see, you and I are going to stumble with sin. And we need someone who's willing to say, look, I see that this is a mistake. I see that where you're going is not right. I see that the attitude that you have or the anger that you have is not godly. And let me pray for you. Or how can I help you? Or let's talk about this. Or what's going on? But you need someone who's willing to just come in and say, this isn't right. To pull you back from the edge. Peter was that kind of guy. We beat up on him because we say, man, I can't believe he would rebuke the Lord. But I say he had the courage to talk to his friend when he thought his friend was wrong. And do you have someone in your life who could be that honest with you, who could save you from being burned in the fire, who could save you from the train wreck, from the failed marriage, from the destruction of the relationship, from the whatever it is that do you have that person speaking into your life? You need someone like that. You need someone like that. Let's look at this next story here, a next view of an inner three friendship, what that looks like. I want you to turn to the Gospel of John. So you're in Matthew, go forward 3 books in the Bible to the Gospel of John. Very last gospel there. And in John chapter 19, and starting in verse 25, we want to look at another story. So we have Peter's story here, how he speaks into Jesus' life as an inner three friend. And I want to look a little bit at how John becomes an inner three friend for Jesus. In John chapter 19 and verse 25, it says that near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. And when Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, now that's John. I don't know why he doesn't just say John. He always refers to himself in sort of a weird way here, but That's who he's talking about. So here's John. When Jesus sees John, he says to his mother, "Dear woman, here is your son." And to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that time on, this disciple took her into his home. Here's the second thing I want you to write down. You need a friend who you can trust to help care for you in your time of need. You need a friend who you can trust to help care for you in your time of need. Jesus is facing his final moments in this earthly life. He's nailed to a cross. There is no possible way of escaping death. And you might remember that Jesus is the oldest son of Mary, right? The Bible talks about she had other sons and daughters, but he is the oldest son here. And as the oldest son, he has a responsibility then to care for Mary. Joseph is probably passed away at this time because we don't hear anything else about him. And if Joseph were alive, I'm sure he'd be at the cross too, but he's not there. And so here Jesus is on the cross, and here Mary is, and he knows I need to care for her. In fact, James, the half-brother of Jesus, will write in his epistle, "Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world." So here Jesus is in this anguished state with all the pain and the weight of sin on his shoulders, and he looks down and he sees his close friend John, the brother of James, both of whom were part of that inner three, and he calls upon him to care for Mary. Two things you don't want in your life at this time in history. You don't want to be an orphan, and you don't want to be a widow. Because if you're an orphan, there is no one to care for you. You can read all kinds of stuff about how it was in the Greco-Roman world. No one cared much for these orphans. They'd be left to run the streets. They'd be left to die. There's no DCF. There's no foster care system. They're just out there on their own. You have a hard enough time caring for yourself, let alone bringing in another mouth to feed. And if you're a widow, the same thing kind of happens to you. If your husband is gone, has passed away, and you don't have a son to bring you into his home and to care for you, you're pretty much left destitute. The whole story of Ruth is all about that. Naomi's husband has died. Her 2 sons have died. She tells her daughter-in-laws, "Don't bother coming back with me. I've got nothing for you. It's going to be hard for me." Orpah says, "That's it. I'm out of here. I'm going back to my hometown." And it's Ruth who sticks by her, because they knew the situation. So here's the situation. Jesus is about ready to die, and he says, "John, I want you to care for my mother." The interesting thing here is that Jesus has other half-brothers, and he has half-sisters. Why would he not call on them? I think it's this. They don't think that he's the Messiah. They don't recognize him as Lord. And I think that Jesus wants someone to care for his mother who will reflect the truth of who he is. You know, Galatians 6:2 says, "Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ." We are to care for one another in those hard times. I want to ask you, who are your friends when things are down? When the world is caving in around you? When the terrible news of cancer comes to your life? When you lose a member of your family? When your job suddenly comes to an end and the bills pile up? When the house is repossessed and you have nowhere to stay? You know, we constantly get phone calls here at the church of people who have hit hard times. They need a place to live because they find themselves out of their home. Or they've ran out of cash and they have no way to get back. They're stranded. They need money to get to where their family is, maybe in another state or something like that. They have nowhere to turn. And I try very hard not to be hard-hearted and cold to those constant calls that come in there. But I want to ask them, I want to say, where is your family? What relationships have you developed so that when life happens to you, and it does happen to you, that you have somewhere to turn? And then I ask them, well, what church do you go to? Sometimes they don't go to a church at all, and I want to say, and? Why are you not involved in a church? Or they'll tell me, well, I go to this church, and then I want to say, then why is your church family not caring for your needs? Because someone in our church who calls, we strive to care for all their needs. I don't want them to go to another church. If they come to this church should help them. And we do all that we can to help them. See, folks, when life happens, you need someone to turn to. And life happened to Jesus. He needed someone to turn to, and he turned to John. The Bible tells us in 1 Timothy 5:8 that if anyone does not provide for his relatives and especially for his immediate family, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. I mean, that is strong language. If you don't care for your family, your immediate family, you can't. How can you claim Christianity? How can you claim the love of God? According to Paul, you can't. You've denied it. If you're a member of the church and a member of the church has a legitimate need and you just walk away, how can you claim the faith? How can you claim the love of God? We need to invest in friendships. And when we do, it's like having insurance. When the hard times come, when the waters rise, when the storms hit, we have someone to turn to. And Jesus had John. And I think he turned to John because he wanted them to know who he was. He wanted Mary to be cared for like that. Parents, you understand this. I alluded to this earlier, but you know what it's like. When you write in your will there, you have young children, you write in your will for someone to care for your children, if something tragically happens to both of you and left there, you know that when you name that person to care for your kids, sometimes it's not always your family. Because they may not reflect your views, your beliefs. When Michelle and I first had this discussion when the kids were really little, my brothers weren't really involved in any church. They believed in Christ, but they weren't really involved in church. They weren't reflecting the life that I wanted my kids to have. And I didn't name my brothers as to care for my kids. And I can tell you when they found out, they were mad. And I had to have that conversation. You're not involved in church like I want you to be. And I said, as much as I love you, I want to see my kids again. And the only way that's going to happen is if they grow up and come to know Jesus Christ. So I'm doing all that I can, even while I'm gone, to make sure they know. John is that guy. In times of need, he filled in the gap. He stood in the gap and he said, I will care for her and I trusted you as Lord and Savior. And we know that because we have the gospel that he wrote and the great book of Revelation that talks about the King of Kings coming again. I think that Mary, because of John, came to understand even better who Jesus was. And I think that's why he called on John instead of his other brothers and sisters. Let's look at the third part of a story of an inner friend. Go to the Gospel of Luke. So you're in John, just go back now to the Gospel of Luke in the 9th chapter. In the 9th chapter of the Gospel of Luke in verse 51, we're going to look at this. This is an interesting story. I didn't even recognize this story this way until I got to studying it this week. And maybe it'll resonate with you because it might be something new to you as well. It says, starting in verse 51, chapter 9, as the time approached for him to be taken up into heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. And he is steadfast. He knows where he's going. And he sent messengers ahead of him who went into a Samaritan village. Now, you know that Jews don't normally travel through Samaria because they can be ceremonially unclean and they don't like each other. Jews don't like Samaritans. Samaritans don't like the Jews. So he's traveling into a Samaritan village to get things ready for him. But the people there did not welcome him because he was heading for Jerusalem. They don't like being the little shortcut to Jerusalem. They don't like how they're treated when people come through there, and so they don't like the entourage that has been set ahead. Now, here's the interesting thing. In verse 54, it says, when the disciples James and John, who Jesus called the sons of thunder, because they're like, they love to wrestle, and they're like UCF of the New Testament world, or UFC, is that it? Ultimate Fighting Champ? That's who these guys are, all right? They're like cage fighters for the New Testament world here. When James and John saw this, they asked, now here's why I say that. They said, Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven and destroy them? And Jesus turned to them and he rebuked them and said, turned and rebuked them, and they went to another village. Now, I gotta love these kind of guys. Because here Jesus' group goes in there and they reject them, and Jesus is kind of getting treated bad. And these guys come and they say, okay, now listen here, God. You want us to go over there? We will take them out at the knees. We will break their knuckles and we will make them rule the day when we came through here. Now, I'm not saying go out and beat someone up, but I'm saying those are the kind of people you want on your side, are they not? I mean, I want some people who come in there and say, all right, my brother used to say this, if we're going to dance, then let's dance. You know what I'm saying? I like that kind of, this is James and John. They have an intensity. When someone goes to attacking them, they have an intensity. I like to watch the Mutual of Omaha shows, you know, when the crowd is together of the animals, whatever it is. I mean, they get so tight. They're not letting some lion come in and get the little baby gazelle or the older, you know, gazelle that's on his last leg or whatever. They stick together and say, we're all going down together. Folks, that's what the church needs. And you need friends who will come together and they'll say, I will take a hit for you, I'll take a punch for you, and I'll throw 3 or 4 by the way. That's the kind of person that you need in your life, because sometimes the world's going to come after you. And I think the world's going to come after Christians a lot sooner than we think in this country. And we need to stick together. We need to trust in the Lord, but defend one another. I'm not advocating violence, but I am advocating sticking together. There's a time when we need to face challenges together. Proverbs 17:17 says, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. That was never so true in my life, as I remember one time when my brother, Jim, who was in the Marine Corps 2 years before me, he was in recon and stuff, and he had come down and he was doing some scuba underwater training in San Diego, and Michelle and my mom had flown out to California to see me. We were in Oceanside, California, I think that's what it's called, Camp Del Mar, Camp Pendleton area. And so we were out on the beach there in these little houses, these little trailers they had out there. We rented one for the weekend, and so the 4 of us are there. And so here's my brother is, and me and my mom and Michelle's with us. She can tell you the story because she's scared too. And these guys from the school, some young guys who were drunk, they came and they were upset because someone had beat up their friend. Go figure. Some drunken Marines got beat up on a base. You know, that kind of stuff happens. So here they come over, and they knock on the door, and Jim and I step out, and these guys are so antagonistic. They want to fight. And Jim, he's like, if we're going to dance, let's dance. I was glad that my brother was behind me, because I'm not a fighter. I'm a lover. I mean, I just, you know, I want to hug people. I want to pray for you. I want to hold your hand. You know, I'm not, you know, I don't really like to fight. It's not my thing. All my life, I was the youngest. So I kind of got beat up a lot. So I know how to lose a fight. You know what I'm saying? And so anyway, we were there, and these guys wanted to get in a fight. And I was really glad that Jim was with me, because Jim was a scrapper from the time he was little. We used to call Jim Rambo. You remember the movie? Even today, my brother would be like 45, and I still call him, hey, Rambo, what's going on? I mean, because he's that kind of guy. He was always in fights. And he had a lot of fights in the Marine Corps. And so that's the kind of guy you want. I was glad he was with us because he diffused the situation. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking. But Jim, boy, he was just ready to go. And I would have been like, go get him, Jim. Oh, that looked hard. Oh, yeah, he's on top. Yeah, get him, you know. I'll just be inside here, close the door. You knock if you need help. These guys were young. Jim was only a corporal, so some of you know what it's like, an E4. And he started yelling at these guys, like how you know, and he acted like he was a gunnery sergeant, so he acted like he's like an E7, and they bought it. Of course, they were drunk, and they bought it, you know, and it diffused the situation. I'm like, he's a good fighter, and he's a good actor as well, you know. He convinced them, and it diffused. This passage came to mind. I thought, man, I have some good friends, but I was glad that my brother was there. And I've had some times in my life where I needed some really good friends to come to my defense, and you'll need them as well, because there will be something that will happen in your life where you won't be able to defend yourself. The last church I was at in Kentucky, some things went south with the leadership, and when things got really bad, started to unravel, I knew it was time to leave, and I held on for about another 2 years, and I probably shouldn't have done that because it steadily got worse. When I finally had decided and told him in an elders meeting I was going to resign on a Sunday night, the entire board resigned on Monday. And that got out to the church, and I had a guy from the member come into my office. He stalked what was happening when I was he came into my office and threatened my own life. And I thought, okay, at this point, things are not going so well. And in Kentucky, everyone has a gun in the back seat, you know what I'm saying? And you never know what kind of crazy you have. This was one of them in the church. So I went to my friend, Charlton, who happened to be a lawyer, and then went to another friend in the church who was a police officer, and I said, look, I'm just going to preach one Sunday. I'm not going to blast anybody. I'm just going to resign, and everything's going to be fine. I just want to walk away. But I have this guy now who's threatening my life. I'm not really sure what to do about it. And so Charlton said, from now on, you are my client. And he represented me against the church in that respect. And he called the elders and he said, now this is what's happening. Steve isn't your preacher anymore. He's my client. You want to talk to him? You talk to me. And it was so awesome. It was so awesome when I went in there that Sunday and they came up to talk to me and he said, "Hey, do you have something to say to my client?" I'm like, I'm getting ready to preach a sermon. And he's like, "Do you have something to say to my client?" I was glad that I had a lawyer as a friend. You know what I'm saying? Everyone needs a lawyer as a friend like that. Because he diffused the situation. They protected me in that. He let them know, you keep coming after him, we're going to come after you. We're going to come in court. Which was good because his dad and his brother were in a law firm together, and their brother was the judge. So I couldn't lose. You know what I'm saying? I could not lose. I just tell you that because I was glad that several years before I took the time to get to know Charlton. I almost didn't get to know him because I thought, he's a lawyer, and who wants to be friends with a lawyer? You know what I'm saying? I didn't feel like I could be friends with him. But we invested time together, we had dinner together, we went out together. I baptized his wife into Christ, and at the time when I needed him, he came to my defense. And he allowed me to leave there in a gracious way. There were a few other people who were there that I said, that's a person I know would take a bullet for me. You need people like that in your life. Jesus had that with James and John. Hey, you want us to call down curses and we'll let fire come down and destroy them. And Jesus says, we're not going to have that. But I have to think that it just made him feel good to know that these guys loved him and were committed that much that they'd come to his aid. So as Mark and our song team comes, let me just kind of bring this to a head here. Who would you call on right now to defend you if you needed it? Who could come to your side if you had someone or something happening and you just needed some help? I hope that you have someone, because it's going to happen someday. Jesus had friendship with 12 men, but then he had a friendship that went a little bit deeper with his inner three, Peter, James, and John. And though they didn't do everything right, like Peter rebuking him, and James and John, they wanted to strike down and kill some people, they had the best interest, I think, of Jesus' heart. Peter was honest and wanted to tell Jesus when he thought something was wrong. John cared for his mother in the way that Jesus knew she needed to be cared for. James was willing to get in the fight and take a couple of licks if he needed to for the cause of Christ. And because of that, they got to see some things in Jesus that no one else saw. They saw his transfiguration. They saw Jesus raise a little girl to life. They were the ones who were asked to come into the deeper part of the garden to be with Jesus when he prayed and poured out his heart to the Father. I happen to think that they were close enough to hear those words. I want to tell you to take time to build more than just acquaintances in the church. If you come here on a Sunday morning and you listen to the sermon and you sit in the pew and you say hi and it's nice to see you and you walk out and that's all you see people with, you are not developing an inner three friendship. You might know some people. You might recognize their names or read their name tag, which I lost mine. But I know who I am. But you need to start building those relationships because hard times are going to come, life's going to happen, and you're going to need someone to point out when you're erring. You're going to need someone to help care for you when you can't care for yourself. And you're going to need someone to come to your side when you can't defend yourself. I want to end with this final thought. Ecclesiastes 4 verse 12 says, though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves, and a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Why are we so big on trying to develop life groups? It's because of this. Because I know that when you're out there by yourself, you will fall away from the church a lot faster. You will fall back into sin a lot faster. You will give up a lot quicker. But when you're in fellowship, in a small life setting, doing life together, someone's going to recognize you're gone. They're going to encourage you when you're down. They're going to come to your aid. They might defend you when someone else is picking on you and say, look, they got some problems, but we're not going to tear apart this. This is a brother and sister in Christ, and we're not going to have that. One person can be overpowered. That's why the Bible says, seeking whom, in singular, he may devour. It's a lot harder when he takes on a whole life group or he takes on a whole church. Get involved in the church. Get involved in a life group. You be that friend to somebody else, and someone else will be that friend to you.